Thank you. And as always, when I show up here, I'm grateful to be here with you guys. I'm glad Jeff's got confidence to keep asking me, and you guys keep allowing me to come back. And I think I told you guys this last time I was here that typically you can stay popular at visiting churches by doing two things. All right, number one, ending on time. And number two, be positive. All right, and so I'm up here a little bit earlier than what I typically get up on stage today, so we're going to definitely be on time, and I hope to be positive as well. And I am grateful. I told Kim this last time, whenever you only visit a church every so often to speak, you have a lot of time to prepare. All right, and so you get a lot of time to try to figure out what God wants you to do and how they want you to share, or what He wants you to share, and different things like that. And I was telling Patty before the service today, this is a little bit different for me today. I had to create a message today that was formal, because basically today I have a quiet time with God journal here that basically I'm sharing notes with you out of today. A little bit different message for me. All right, and I did go through and try to come up with a little bit of a formal outline per se to so that I would be looked upon as a preacher. But I want you to know this is a little bit different for me today, and I do want to share because I want it to be something that you can walk out and say, you know what, that's something I can take with me this week, and that's always my goal. All right, it's always my goal. So I'm going to be in 1 Samuel 30. If you want to turn there, will be what my formal text will be, or look it up on your phone, whatever you've got with you today. I invite you to go there, but I want to ask you a question first, okay? And I want an initial response from you in your head, and then I want you to think of it. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to think about it. All right, so my question to you is this: who is the most influential person in your life? All of you should have had an initial thought. Now I want you to take 30 seconds and think about it. The most influential person in your life. Anybody's answers change? No? Everybody's good with their initial response. For a typical crowd, that's going to be one of several people. Okay? It's going to be a parent. Okay? Going to be the most influential. I was glad when I asked my daughter before the message today who was the most influential. She said me and Patty. I was thrilled with that. Okay? That's a good response, Taylor. I love it. All right? For some of you, and for Patty as well, the most influential in her life happened to be her father, her dad. Okay? For many of us, parents are that. I miss that influence in my life. My mother passed several years ago. She was a great influence on my life. For some of you, it may have been your spouse. That's somebody that's influenced you to do the right thing, to live a different way that you should. For some of you, it might have been a close friend. For some of you, it may have been a pastor that's had some form of influence on your life to get you directed in the right way. For some of you super spiritual people in here today, you said God. I can appreciate that. How many of you thought about the negative influence rather than just positive influence? All I asked you was who was the most influential. Most of us think of a positive influence. And if I'm going to stand here today and just, once again, I'm going to share some of my notes and some of my thoughts on things like this, what if I told you all of you are wrong with those responses? What if I told you today that the most influential person in your life is you? You say, well, how can that be? Here's this. I did some research on this over the last month or so. And here's this. In an average day, we have 60,000 thoughts that come through our mind. 60,000 thoughts. 80% of them are negative. So in the course of the day, 80% of what you're thinking is negative. So where's the most influence in your day? Is it that one little message you might hear from your parents that are encouraging to you to do the right thing? I've been fixated over the last month in my quiet time. Matter of fact, going back to October 4th, reading through Proverbs. October 4th came across this verse, Proverbs 4:23. Says this, above all else, guard your heart, for everything flows from it. Dr. Paul Tripp, pastor, famous author, says this, no one is more influential in your life than you. No one talks to you more than you. There's another translation of that verse, Proverbs 4:23, that says this, be careful what you think. Your life is shaped by your thoughts. So today, as I'm just kind of sharing with you some things out of my journal and really just trying to help as we go about our day-to-day walk with God, I don't think there's another person in the Bible that has learned about the power of his thoughts than David. And when you read through some of the Psalms and you read through some of the things that David has written, there's so many times he goes into these writings and the beginning of his writings are just absolutely horrible. They're describing a life that is just in complete turmoil. And so when he's describing this, by the time that he gets done, he's back to being positive again. And so I love reading some of his Psalms and some of the things that David writes just because he's one that learned to encourage himself. And I want to pull a story today from 1 Samuel 30 out of David's biography. But I want to set the scene before we read first 7 or 8 verses here. I just want to set a scene here. David running from King Saul, who's been trying to kill him. Okay, so as he's running, David gets picked up as kind of like a mercenary. Him and his men get picked up as kind of a mercenary army to go and fight with the Philistines. So he's fighting with them against all these other nations. And because David was such a great warrior, he basically was getting paid to fight for the Philistines against other people. And so that's where we kind of come in. But something happens in this particular passage leading up to 1 Samuel 30 is that David, while he's running from King Saul and he's fighting for the Philistines and becomes a mercenary for them, one day the Philistines are coming up against the Israelites. And the Philistines thought that it would be a conflict of interest for David to come up and to fight against them, which it was. But David was actually prepared to do it. He was just in the back lines. He was ready to fight. You can read that going all the way back to like 27, all the way up until this point. So he was ready to fight for the Philistines against the Israelites. And the leader of the army of the Philistines said, no, that's not going to happen because we don't trust you, David. We want you to go home. And so David actually puts up a little bit of argument, says, look, I've been loyal to you. Why don't you just let me fight? And the king said, no, you're leaving. And so he sends him away, and that's where we pick up here in 1 Samuel chapter 30. Okay, and I want to read here as we go. Like I said, first 7 verses or so. It says, and it came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the 3rd day that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag and smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captive that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire. And their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captive. And then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's 2 wives were taken captive. And David, in verse 6, first part, and David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. I want to stop right there, because that last part of that verse right there is where I want to focus today, where it says this, but David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. How difficult do you think that little segment of story for David was? How difficult for him to go home and to find his own town that he was living in, to where he had taken up camp, burned to the ground, and everybody gone from it. Everybody that meant anything to him taken captive. Everybody who meant anything to him, his sons, the daughters, his wives, taken captive and taken away. The distress and the anguish that David must have had, the voices that may have been in David's head at this point as to why in the world God would allow something like that to happen. But it gets worse here, to where it says that David's men at that very point wanted to take David and stone him. So trying to just teach a little bit in this, it says, but David encouraged and strengthened himself in the Lord. I want you to think about that for a moment. What does it take to encourage and strengthen yourself in the Lord? Just exactly how can David strengthen and encourage himself in the Lord? And this is my going back to kind of make a sermon out of this. I've kind of gone through and picked out 3 things that David did here that just stood out to me in the story. All right. Number 1, he put worship before warfare. He put worship before warfare. Think about that for a minute. How often our first response is always to fight? And if you know anything about the Bible whatsoever, you know David's history. David's history is this. David is a warrior. Okay, we think about him with Goliath, where he used the sling, he killed Goliath. He didn't just kill him, he took the sword and went over and he cut his head off. All right, David was a warrior as tending his sheep. All right, he fights against the lions, he fights against the bears. He was a warrior first of all. But in this particular instance, rather than going and pursuing at this very moment, David takes a moment and he says he encouraged himself in God, because he took a moment to worship before he took a moment to fight. And so I wonder today how many of our first responses are to fight. Is your first response in every situation to go about and to fight? In James chapter 1, verse 19, verse says this, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of your first response is to slow to speak in a fighting situation? Nobody's hands? Look, in a fighting situation, line them up, let's go. All right? My first response is not slow to speak. So let's ask again, how many of us are slow to anger when it's time to fight? Look, in the pandemic times, I wish I could have brought and put the video over this. I don't even remember the show, okay? But it was a sitcom, and I'm watching, and this lady in this old beat-up car, all right, comes up to this and parks next to this lady that's in a nice newer car, all right? And the newer car opens the door, bangs on the girl, and she's sitting in the front seat, bangs on the door, and the girl looks at her like this, like, it would be absolutely perfect if you would just say, I'm sorry. Just say, I'm sorry. And the girl looks at her and says, well, it's not even like it's going to hurt the resale value of your car. And so what's the girl do? The girl gets in the car. The girl that's in the clunker opens her door and just smashes against hers. And so now it just becomes this all-out war. They just keep doing it. And so the girl in the nice car backs out and decides, well, I'm just going to take off her bumper. So she turns the car, takes the front of her car, and takes off the bumper of the girl's car there. And so they get out, and the whole sitcom was about these two cars fighting each other and having an all-out NASCAR war in the middle of the parking lot. All right, they are just, until finally the one point, the bumper sticker on the back of the car, with the clunker says, war is not the answer. And so that was the point of it. And I thought this week as I'm preparing this, I don't know why that story came back to me. I'm thinking to myself, how often are we so quick to anger? To where it escalates to different things. And see, that's not guarding our heart. That Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart. That heart is your emotions, your inner being, who you are. God says to guard them at all cost. And in order to be able to encourage yourself and to change that 80% of negative thoughts, you've got to learn to worship before you fight. That word worship, I love to worship music. I can't sing a lick. Literally, when I put the mic on today and they had me on mute, I told them back in the back, I said, don't turn on and listen to me sing. All right, because I can't sing, but I love to worship. And so in my time over the last month trying to prepare and thinking about this, what is that word worship? It means this, it means to honor and to show reverence. And I thought to myself, look, slow to speak, if I'm quick to speak, am I really showing honor and reverence to God? If I'm quick to anger, am I really showing reverence to God? And then I thought about it even more as these negative thoughts start going through your mind. Basically, are you really honoring and showing reverence to God when you're basically saying, God, you're not in control? If I'm quick to speak and I've got an anger about me, am I really showing that you're in control? Circumstances, situations that come across you, you've got to be able to control your thoughts and your emotions. You've got to be able to guard your heart. You've got to be able to encourage yourself, and you can encourage yourself by first off showing worship before fight. Does that mean that you're not going to fight? Absolutely not. Does that mean you're not going to be slow to speak or that you're going to be slow to speak in every situation? Absolutely not. Look, if somebody's stepping off the curb in front of a bus, I'm not going to be slow to speak. All right? There's times to where things have to be addressed. There's times that things have to be talked about. But I'm saying that in order to control our minds, to guard our hearts, that there's times that we have to figure out timing sometimes. My mother, one of the things I miss most about my mom was my mom had absolutely perfect timing for correction. All right? She used to always try to teach, says Rich, when she was trying to teach me how to be a good parent, she was always, you praise in public, you correct in private. All right, that was one of her rules. All right, and I had plenty of correction in private, bathrooms, restaurants, foyers of churches, and things like that. But I thought about that this week as well. Sometimes correction, you need to find good timing. And as we're trying to control our heart and our emotions, that you can just let something fester and get out of control, or you can find the time and the situation to correct it. Just need to find good timing. All right? Sometimes we speak just to argue. All right? If I can't fix you, then I'm probably not going to argue with you. wife and daughter here today. They will tell you that. If I can't fix it, I probably won't speak. All right, I'm not going to argue with you just to argue. If you want my input, let's have a full-out conversation. All right, I'm good with that. But what I do when it comes to this James 1:19, we're slow to speak, slow to anger. What I do is I don't always listen. All right, and I think this verse has something to do with that. When we're talking about our mind, we're talking about our emotions. I'll listen to you, but my listening is with an intent to respond. So I don't always hear what you're saying because I already have a response ready. All right, and so I think that's slow to speak sometimes, which I'm trying to learn to do, is when you tell me something that maybe we're going to have a confrontation about, I'll repeat it back to you. All right, that keeps me from forming an opinion and an answer before you finish. All right, and so as regard our heart, I would suggest that you be slow to speak, slow to anger, because it can definitely change that guarding of your heart. Number 2, ask for direction. I love this part about the story. If you continue a little bit further in verse 7, it says, and David said to Abiathar the priest, he said, son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. Listen, this is what the priest would put on. It was like a vest that the priest would go and he would put it on them. All right, and when the priest put it on, it basically meant, I'm seeking God's direction for my people. All right, so let's take that into the church like this. I know that in the Baptist realm, we don't wear robes and stuff like that. If preachers don't put on their robe and put on their nice little attire in order to, but let's just imagine for a moment that that's the idea, that Jeff, when he's trying to seek direction of the church, okay, that he puts on this gown that comes and he kneels before God looking for direction. I want you to get that picture because that's what it is here. David's going to the priest and he says, listen, I need your vest so that I can get God's direction. What am I to do? And what was David asking for? David was saying, do I stay here or do I pursue? That's what David was doing. He was asking God, what am I doing? And so as he had that on and he was asking God, God gave him clear direction. God said, pursue, go. So David gathered his men and they pursued after them. What if God would have said, don't pursue? I believe David wouldn't have pursued because he was looking for God's direction. How often do we look for God's direction? We might worship. We might get our minds right. We might get our hearts right. We might get our emotions right. But do we really seek what God's true direction is? Or are we just saying, God, put a stamp of approval on what I want to do? And I think sometimes that's how we end up going about our lives. I love the verse, Psalm 119, 143. If you guys are taking notes, write it. Like I said, I've got a little bit more time today so I can read all of them. It's 119, 1, for trouble and anguish have taken a hold on me. But the second part of it, yet thy commandments are my delights. When you get into that situation to where things are just not right, they're not right in your mind, they're not right in your heart, God says, look, seek after my delight, seek after my word, seek after the commandments that I have for you. Your joy in your times of trouble are not going to come from your own conclusions, but from God's commands. They're also not going to come from ungodly sources. David sought God's direction in this. Several chapters before this, King Saul was getting ready to go into battle of his own. And the prophet Samuel had recently passed away. Samuel was the prophet that basically told Saul what to do at all costs. And so for the most part, Saul always did what Samuel told him to do, but Samuel had died. So what was Saul's response? Did he go before God and look for God's direction into what he should do? No, he did not. He consulted with a psychic. Bad decisions to get information and direction from people outside of what your character and training have always been. Say, well, what's that mean? That means that if you're not a Christian, if you're not a Christian counselor, I don't need to hear you tell me how to go about my job as a preacher. Okay? So godly counsel and godly direction comes from God. For several years now, I've been attending a men's Bible study. And part of this men's Bible study, they keep talking about BGPs. All right? And you say, well, what is that? It's called big godly people. Big godly people. Every person in the world needs a BGP. It doesn't matter your spiritual condition, you need a BGP. Whether or not you're a new Christian that's been around for 20 years, or you're like some of you in here that are just very spiritually mature. Everybody needs a big godly person. And so that's one of the things that has been instituted, that in order to get good direction, you need to come across big godly people that can help direct and guide you through circumstances that maybe you have not been through. Number 3 in my story today, and this one's going to seem a little bit strange, but remember, I'm just writing things down in my journal, and now I'm presenting them to you. In order to get and to guard your heart, you should treat others fairly. This may seem like a strange point when talking about encouraging yourself, but let's think about it for just a few moments. How many times that we are going through something rough, our minds are out of control, there's all these negative thoughts. Are we the only people that know about it, or does everybody that's around us know it? Look, when your conversations are always negative to other people, all right, you're not guarding your heart. And so in this particular story, as I'm gathering out in order to present it in a sermon form, we find this, that David actually did this. And so many times when we're in despair and we get caught up in focusing on all the negatives and things about like that, we don't treat other people the way that they deserve to be treated. And so if you pick up in this story to where David has now pursued after the people who had taken all of his belongings, all of his physical belongings, all of his people. I mean, the whole town was gone. They had basically taken everything. And so David pursues after them. He gets some help from somebody along the way that directs him where to go. He goes and he recaptures everything, plus all the goods from the people who took it. All right, so now he's got all this stuff. God has returned it to him, taught him some valuable lessons, I'm sure. And so David's now on his way back. But as he went, he left with 500 men. And so on the way, 200 of his men got so tired they couldn't continue. And so he left them with some of the belongings and said, okay, you're too tired to help me anyway. Took his men, went and captured everybody. On the way back, all of his men said, well, they're not getting anything. They didn't come with us. And David said, no, that's not how we work. That's not how we work. They tended, they did all that they could, all right? We're going to give them all the spoils from the camp that we just confiscated all this stuff from. And so he even wrote it into a law during that time that even if you didn't go to battle, you got to enjoy the prosperities that we brought back from the battle. See, David was treating people fairly. And so I thought this week that that just seemed kind of silly. But I have to ask you guys a question. How do you treat other people? Literally, how do you treat other people? I can pretty much guarantee you how you treat other people, I can figure out how well you're guarding your heart. Just treat people right. It's not that difficult. Treat them with kindness. Treat them with a joyful spirit. All right? It's not hard. And it's a commandment of God to do so. So David, in this particular passage, treated people right. And he treated people fairly. And so those are my notes as I come to guarding your heart. What does it mean to you to guard your heart? What does it mean to you to guard your heart? I want to read here Psalms 19:14. Psalms 19:14. There's a verse that I've been focused on as well through this time, but not quite like I had Proverbs 4:23, but Proverbs 19:14, it says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer." And I didn't get this until I started focusing on Proverbs 4:23. Let the words of my mouth, that's how I treat others, the meditation of my heart, that's my emotions, okay, my feelings, okay, be acceptable. So we've got it in Proverbs to where God's saying, look, guard your heart above everything else. And then you've got this part that says, look, let the meditation of your heart be acceptable. So as I close today, I want to ask you guys these questions, okay? Number one, are you guarding your heart? How do you guard your heart? You do it by worshiping first. You worship to where you give reverence to God. You follow God's direction. Okay, so are you protecting your heart? But is the meditation of your heart acceptable to God? What's your meditation? In your alone time, when you're thinking, are your thoughts positive or negative? Are you thinking about helping others, or are you thinking about how god-awful they are? Two extremes, yes. All right, but the question is, how is our heart? How is our emotions? How is our thinking? What's our thought life like? When we're alone, are our thoughts positive? I sound like Zig Ziglar. Anybody know who Zig Ziglar is? That's an old guy. Okay? Zig Ziglar used to be this power of positive thinking kind of guy. All right? And I've tried to take the power of positive thinking today and bring it into a church setting and put it behind a verse, Proverbs 4:23, that says, guard your heart, guard your thoughts, guard your emotions, guard your thinking. You guard those, all right? And I honestly believe I'd far rather be around positive people than negative people. Amen. All right? Use your power of positive thinking in order to change the world. Amen. You can change it through, look, I can be honest, but Randy, Todd, I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to share the gospel with somebody when I'm negative, because they're not listening to me. They might be, but they've turned me off. All right? So try to be positive with people. Try to encourage people. And use your mind to do that and your heart to do that. You guys stand with me for just a moment as we pray. And this is going to be a little bit of a different invitation. I don't think I've ever given an invitation without inviting somebody to come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Okay? You shouldn't come to church and not have somebody tell you how to do that. And so today I would like to take a moment, if you are somebody that doesn't come to church often and you say, man, that's not exactly what I was expecting, I get it. But we always want church to be about Jesus. All right? We just don't want to ever walk out of here and say, man, I wish I'd have just told somebody about Jesus. And so today I would like to ask that question. If you are here today and you say, man, I don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, I'd like to know how. I'll be here. I'd love to take a few moments just to show you what that looks like. If I'm speaking a foreign language to you today, come see me. All right? Let me try to interpret it and make it easier for you. But to the topic that I gave today, I'd like to challenge you with this. I'd like to challenge you, number one, every single day to make it a practice to try to guard your heart. That's my invitation to you today. Guard your heart. How do you do that? You start by a worship. Start every morning with a worship. If you're not at the point every day to where you're spending time with God's Word, I'm asking you to take every day to wake up to a worship set. Just begin the day with some worship to get your mind so that you can guard what God's given us to guard. So I invite you to do that. That's my invitation to you today. Father, thank you so much for your opportunity. I do count it as a privilege anytime I'm asked to speak, but especially here to where I have been treated like family, and I treat the church like family as well. And I'm grateful for Pastor to give me this opportunity. I do pray today, Father, that if there is anybody that's here today, I can say, I just don't know. I don't know that I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, that today would be that day. And Father, I do pray that we will make a decision today. Make it a practice to guard our hearts with all diligence, Father, because everything that is about us as Christians comes from our heart. That's in your word. And so I pray that today that we will guard our heart, we will make just a conscious effort every day to do that. Father, I love you. I'm grateful for everything that you give us. All of it so undeserved. It's your precious and holy name we pray. Amen. I'm done. You don't have to. I'm good. Okay? It's okay. It's all right. That's what I said. We didn't talk about that all that much. I will be here afterwards if you guys need to talk and need anything. Please come see me. I'll hang around, and I am grateful to be here. I enjoy it. I enjoy you guys. So please. This is the first time ever here that I did not embarrass somebody in my family with a story. And so, but anyway, thank you guys for being here. Take care.